Right. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for a webinar titled Staying Smart and Compliant with Food Contact Material Testing, the latest global updates from recycled to regulatory. So our presenter today is Trish Hook, the Technical Business Manager with Eurofins SFA Group. Born and raised in Hong Kong, Trish earned her bachelor's degree in product development from the London Institute. She joined Eurofins in 2020 and has since built deep expertise in global compliance and regulatory frameworks with a focus on packaging, food contact materials, and failure mechanisms. Her work spans a wide range of packaging types and applications, helping clients ensure that products meet stringent international requirements for food safety and consumer protection. So welcome, Trish. With that brief introduction, I'll just hand it right over to you, Trish, and you can start your presentation.
Thanks so much, Scott. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. In today's webinar, I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of the latest updates and considerations for food contact materials. My goal today is not to be too technical, but just enough to provide you with a good understanding of current updates and guidelines in this very complicated and constantly evolving category. So as Scott mentioned, I am the Business Development Strategy and Solutions Manager at Eurofins SFA. Who is that? We are the Eurofins SFA cluster, which includes the following labs specifically for packaging testing. That's the SF Analytical Lab in New Berlin, Wisconsin, and the SN Special Analysis West Lab in Tustin, California. Our group in Eurofins brings a non-routine, think outside the box, and expert understanding into the complexities involved in unique investigative projects covering categories such as food and beverage, medical, aerospace, cosmetics, packaging, consumer products, and much, much more. We specialize in investigative services which use lab techniques such as GCMS, FTIR, DSC, microscopy, EDX, covering a wide range of categories, including custom migration projects, material and particulate characterizations, failure analysis, chemical analysis, foreign material ID identification, and off-flavor, off-odor, to name but a few. In today's agenda, we're going to be covering why food contact material testing matters now more than ever, the regulatory landscape, what's changing, the rise of recycled and sustainable materials, smart testing strategies for compliance within your company, and of course, how our services can support you. Why does food contact material testing matter now more than ever? Well, global regulatory pressure is on the rise. Sustainability, of course, is driving new material use. We need to build consumer trust and brand reputation. And there is innovation and speed to market for new materials. So what's changing? Governments are tightening standards across the US, the EU, and Asia, and across the globe, with updates to regulations occurring more and more frequently. And what does that mean? That means a higher risk of non-compliance. Across the United States on the federal level, most notably, we have food contact notifications with a growing emphasis on data around NIAS and cumulative exposure. On January 6th, the FDA declared that 35 food contact notifications for PFAS used in grease-proofing agents in paper food packaging are no longer effective. This marks the end of a voluntary phase-out process that began in 2020, aiming to eliminate PFAS from food packaging due to their persistence in the environment and potential health risks. On May 15th, the FDA announced a new framework to overhaul post-market review of food chemicals. This initiative aims to increase transparency and accelerate the evaluation of chemicals already in the US food supply, including those in FCMs, of course. And then very soon after, on August 19th, the FDA updated this list of select chemicals currently under review, reflecting the agency's ongoing efforts. I provided a link to the FDA here. One example of this is lead. Previously categorized as a contaminant, lead is now being reviewed as a food contact substance. On a state level, notably California, I'm going to bring attention to, they brought in a Safer Food Packaging Act bill as of February 2025. This bill aims to regulate antimony trioxide, bisphenols, and orthophthalates in FCMs. Another one would be the Reducing Toxics in Packaging Act of 2024. This bill seeks to eliminate PVC and PFAS substances from food packaging by January 2026. That's very soon. This bill exempts packaging for medical products, animal medicines, and products regulated as pesticides by federal law, just to keep that in mind. It's just food packaging right now. Some other key contaminants are polystyrene. As of September 2025, 12 states have enacted a statewide ban of expanded polystyrene in food serviceware in comparison to the rest of the world where it's already banned. Phthalates, in 2025, Minnesota became the first state to address the presence of phthalates in FCMs. They introduced a bill which requires phthalate target testing in food products. Big deal. PFAS, an ongoing trend. Up to 20 states have now introduced or are in development for legislation to prohibit the sale and use of FCMs containing intentionally added PFAS. In the rest of the world, the European Union, now their main regulation for food contact materials is the Food Framework Regulation 1935-2004. This is currently being reevaluated, so expect stricter controls, including recycled materials and NIAS. I have provided a link here for more information. I'm not going to go into too detail because there's a lot. It's a big overhaul. In China, notably the GB 4806 regulation for them, setting strict migration limits and testing protocols for plastic coatings, paper, inks, and adhesives. Again, this is following the footsteps of the EU. For example, the regulation requires plastics to undergo overall and specific migration, again, just like the EU. And China has also increased border inspection testing with imported materials frequently being flagged for non-compliance. This is something that's happening a lot. I'm helping a lot of clients right now with this issue. Other global pressures include India and ASEAN countries, which are aligning themselves with stricter EU standards, requiring migration testing again. And Canada has introduced restrictions on BPA and is reviewing NIAS concerns. The rest of the world, this means that your global supply chains, you have to comply with multiple regulations across the world, so just make sure you keep on top of that. The only way to be compliant is to test. I've mentioned the word NIAS quite often here in the last few slides. I'm just going to briefly touch on what exactly that is. NIAS stands for non-intentionally added substances. This is a migration test, and it tests the process of identifying and quantifying chemical compounds that end up in food contact materials, even though they were not deliberately added during manufacturing. These could come from impurities or reaction to byproducts or contaminants. The testing involves a similar protocol to migration testing like GCMS, detecting unknowns. And then the result of these tests are then assessed through the toxicological risk assessment to ensure that they don't pose any health risks. So any spikes that occur during the testing will be noted on your report. I provided a very brief diagram here to show how this is formed. The key takeaway for this subject is food contact material testing is no longer just a compliance box. It's becoming a business critical safeguard as regulatory scrutiny rises worldwide. Companies that proactively test and document compliance, especially for NIAS, recycled content, and PFAS, are better positioned to maintain global market access, as non-compliance can result in recalls, import bans, fines, and brand damage. And let me tell you, we are going through it right now with some of our customers. Moving on to sustainability. Sustainability is driving new material use, as we all know. It's one of the biggest forces in reshaping food contact materials today, with a rapidly expanding range of materials. We've certainly seen all kinds of materials come through our door for testing, but they each pose their own new safety concerns. From consumers to regulators, retail brands, they all want packaging that reduces waste, uses less fossil-based plastics, and of course, that is recyclable. All these boxes that need to be checked. We're going to start with recycled plastics. And by that, I mean RPET, RPP, those, anything that with the R in front of it, that stands for recycled versions of that plastic type. And it represents a fast growing trend in sustainable contact materials. However, of course, it's always risk. These particular ones come with their own set of risks. For example, recycled polymers can contain elevated levels of contaminants, NIAS again, and chemical residues. It can be really difficult to trace and control the origin and prior use of plastics. For example, did it come from a detergent? Did it come from medical use? This raising concerns of unknown or unsuitable inputs entering the food contact supply chain. So again, cross-contamination with chemicals from non-authorized materials. Degradation of polymers through chain breaking is another risk. And the impact of quality reducing the physical and mechanical properties while influencing shelf of food. This is another big risk. Therefore, it makes sense for essential and rigorous testing and validation for recycled plastics to be approved in your FCM to prove that they are as safe as their virgin counterparts. It's a big deal right now. When it comes to material characterization, here are some analytical methods investigating chemical, structural, and physical properties to ensure that the same purity and quality for recycled materials as the virgin counterparts. For chemical, there are these following techniques, including ICP-MS or ICP-OES. That's for trace metal content. Of course, the GC and LC versions for volatile and non-volatile contaminants. FTIR, spectroscopy for reactive and polar functional groups. Raman for non-polar and conjugated components, inorganic fillers and pigments. And then we've got structural, such as HRD, GPC, and SEM. And these help with molecular weight distribution, morphology, crystalline and amorphous phase quantification. And then with physical, we use DSC and TGA. And these help with stability and decomposition temperatures and phase transitions and melting behavior. Sometimes we get asked about key chemicals and solvents that can come from end up in recycled plastics, and of course we can't know all the possible solvents because they come from so many different sources. It's still an ongoing subject matter right now globally. Our recommendation is to always pay attention to the key chemicals regulators and what they expect to see tested wherever you're supplying your materials to. But I provided some examples of what we've seen lately. Some known solvents, residual solvents include alcohols, ketones, esters, hydrocarbons, which are used in the decontamination reprocessing. Something to note is that N-hexane has been flagged by the European Food Safety Authority and they're reevaluating data due to potential health concerns. So that's something to note there. Other contaminants from previous use includes, of course, inks and dyes, adhesives, cleaning product residues. These are all things that are part of the material that you're trying to recycle, probably. And any plasticizers, such as phthalates, UV stabilizers, antioxidants, flame retardants, monomers and oligomers left over from incomplete polymerization. And again, our favorite friends, NIAS, byproducts of reprocessing and recycling. I provided a link down here to the EFSA website, providing a little bit more information on this as you try to keep up to date with the constantly moving information. Now I'm going to talk about recycled paperboard because there's plastics, but there's also paperboard is recycled constantly for food packaging. And the regulations and requirements that currently stand for recycled paperboard, especially in the US, is most notably the 21 CFR 176-260, which is pulp reclaimed from fiber. I provided a link here to the regulation. We provide the service at Eurofins. I think we're one of 2 labs that are approved. And this is for reclaimed fiber sources, which must be controlled to avoid contamination. Again, some of the other factors from plastics is exactly the same thing, cleaning the materials. Any additives used in the paperboard, such as coatings and inks, must be permitted for food contact and comply with the extractives, migration, and end test requirements. A lot of manufacturers and paper mills use chemical testing products such as RPTA, which is the Recycled Paperboard Technical Association. They're a members-only association that provide members with a list of contaminants to test the paper against and be compliant. They do a lot of work into every year, annually, staying up to date with all the new contaminants. and also 21 CFR 176/260, both of which we are approved service providers, FYI. And this, certifies compliance and peace of mind, if I'm honest. In the EU, while they have a specific EU legislation for plastics, paper and board do not have a harmonized EU regulation. A lot of the EU companies, I will say, use the US because they have a dedicated regulation that they can follow, and you just need to pay attention to the countries that you're, again, supplying to. Many rules are different in different countries. For example, Germany, they have a proposed draft right now for MOA to ensure it's not transferred through food. And again, I've included the link there to investigate more. But I will say that a lot of our clients follow the US regulation to keep compliant because it's so intricate. In the rest of the world, well, many countries are just referring to US and EU, using them as a benchmark because they don't have their own version. So what's the key takeaway for this? I would, again, check with local national laws because some markets have stricter requirements than others. You might want to go with the EU, with the US for paper, the EU with plastics because they are the leading regulations and they do the most work, and then you can be compliant with everybody. And make sure you obtain the correct certification and documentation that is across the board, from declaration of compliance from your suppliers, proof of origin of raw materials, and industry protocols following their list of regulations and such as RPTA. A few other sustainable material examples that we've seen come into the lab lately include plant-based fibers and coatings such as bagasse, bamboo fiber, molded wheat straw, a lot of bio-based coatings. Palm leaf in particular, which has been around for years, has now recently come under the spotlight with claims that the material naturally leaches occurring alkaloids into food. The FDA actually performed a study which they have determined that these products do not meet the criteria for bringing for GRAS, which is generally recognized as safe list. We have developed at Eurofins an in-house testing plan for this material to determine if your product has specific risks. Please do reach out and contact us for more information on this. There's a big wave of companies across the world, in America, notably on the East Coast, I would say, and in Europe, where reusable food containers programs like glass or silicone are taking place. With systems where you can bring them back. This is from personal care products to food products, dry goods, sauces. I've seen some things with daily, household products that you might use a lot, like pasta sauce and oils. And then edible films and coatings made from seaweed, casein, starch are being used for condiment and drink packages. Again, toxic safety and allergenicity must be evaluated. Apologies for that. Now we're going to move on to innovation. This is leading in from those new materials that we've been seeing. When it comes to EU innovation regulations, Regulation 450/2009 governs active and intelligent packaging in the EU. It ensures that any substance interacting with food are authorized and safe and clearly labeled, protecting consumers while supporting innovation. It's very good. Examples of innovation in packaging includes edible packaging, as was discussed, flexible packaging with high barrier products, and biodegradable and compostable materials. So the steps to be compliant in this category would be material assessment, making sure you identify all intelligent and active components and determine whether they release substances into food. An authorization check, verifying that any releasing substances are on the EU. So if there are anything being released, making sure that you're cross-referencing it with the positive list on all authorized materials. If not, you must submit an application to the European Food Safety Authority for evaluation. And then this ties into migration and safety testing. It's always about migration testing, conducting overall and specific migration tests to confirm safety, and accessing NIAS, again, our old friend, and functional performance. Once you do those tests, documentation, which is your declaration of compliance to support the test reports, will be prepared, and then you also need to make sure, again, as I mentioned earlier, you must maintain traceability throughout the supply chain, especially with your raw materials, or if raw material suppliers change, it's constantly evolving. You have to make sure that that document stays up to date. Labeling and instructions for the product clearly indicating how the packaging active functions work. You know, these are all new products getting onto the market. The customer are not familiar with these materials, and making sure that they understand to not put it in the microwave or only use it for dairy products, etc. Must provide instructions to be clear to the consumers. And then ongoing monitoring, as I mentioned earlier, reassessing materials, especially as the updates, regulations keep evolving. Now, USA and the rest of the world, again, the regulation in the EU is the most specific framework, whereas other regions navigate this new intelligent packaging category. And right now, the EU really is the only dedicated regulation for this. And so a lot of companies from all over the world are using it as the benchmark. In the FDA, again, there's no standalone regulation, but it is governed under GRAS and some of the 21 CFR indirect food additive regulations. Active components must either be GRAS already listed in the regulations. If not, again, we go back to being reviewed through the FCN process. This focuses on safety and non-migration of harmful substances. And again, this is something that our lab offers. We can help put together a protocol for you to provide a report to the FDA to prove that your product is safe. For the rest of the world, again, there is no dedicated active packaging regulation. Most of the regions rely on general food contact laws, the standard ones, and some positive lists in China and Japan. In Canada, they are assessing it by case under general food packaging safety rules. In South America, again, general FCMs apply. China, again, the same, no distinct framework for active packaging. So in general, everyone right now is just using the EU as a benchmark until the other countries can catch up and set up their own. But I think with all the work that's gone into the EU, there's no reason to, because the work's been done and there's not enough market for it right now. So what does that mean as a company for you? You know, these are our recommendations from us, as we've seen a lot of companies come through our doors and keeping into smart testing for your products. Some strategies that you should adopt when it comes to your food content materials, such as keeping up to date with regulatory compliance. This ensures consumer safety and cost efficiency, and of course protects your brand reputation. This also leads to a faster time to market when you've got these processes set in motion or in your department. Every time it's just 1, 2, 3. It's not about testing everything everywhere, but ensuring that you maintain and prioritizing high risk areas, keeping up to date with those, leveraging all the available tools that are out there for you, including our services, aligning with strict and challenging standards and constantly evolving regulations, constantly. Integrating compliance into sourcing and innovation. And applying a risk-based approach. So what does that mean? Risk screening. Mapping materials uses against risk factors. Rank them high, low, medium. What's important to you? What is the highest risk, lowest risk, medium risk? Constantly evaluate. Update risk categories when regulations change. The PFAS is constantly changing, especially in America and the US, with the states implementing their own PFAS bans, and they all have different requirements and limitations. So keeping up to date with those is a constant job, especially for us. Migration testing, again, this is what we help perform for our clients with overall migration. This ensures total substance transfer and specific migration. If I hadn't mentioned before, the difference between overall and the specific, so overall, like it says, is it's a total substance transfer, and it's set to limits specified. Specific migration usually is it's based on the material that you have. If you have a list of components or chemical substances that are in your material that you're using, those specifically need to be targeted, whether it's a plasticizer or a binder or whatever. We need to target those specifically using their CAS number and set the conditions that are intended for use of that product. So sometimes people don't realize that that is part of your compliance. You need to do overall migration and specific migration, not just one or the other. And then on top of that, you also require NIAS testing. Again, our favorite thing, using advanced techniques. So again, migration testing protects consumers, brands, and compliance simultaneously. Strengthen your supply chain. Again, I'm going to keep repeating it because it's a very important fact. You need to request from your suppliers up-to-date certificate of compliance or declaration of compliance. Traceability, always maintain records on your raw material origins, such as recycled inputs and any impurity changes. Anytime anything changes, you need to make sure you stay updated and retest. We've got so many projects right now where they've got a product that's been on the market for 15 years and suddenly it's leaching, or suddenly the metals have changed, or suddenly papers change, or suddenly the colors change, or the smell has changed in the product. These could be so many varying factors. Water supply to the manufacturing. They've changed where they're getting their metal from. They've changed where they're getting their peaches from. They've changed where they're getting their oils from. So all of these factors, any little change can affect your product. Again, ongoing monitoring for activity. I don't need to reiterate. I've just mentioned that. So, we've come to the end of the presentation, but I wanted to just give you a brief overview of our services when it does come to food contact testing, specifically for this area. For the FDA, we offer a broad spectrum of custom migration testing. This includes trace metals migration from nanomaterials and simulants and foodstuffs, migrants from urethane adhesives and tie layers laminate structures, residual contact of fluorocopolymer monomers, oligomer fractionization, characterization, and quantitation from copolymers, non-volatile residue extracts, and of course overline migration, specific migration, NIAS, and many more. These are some of the projects that we've been working on when it comes to FDA FCM notifications. When it comes to global regulatory compliance, again, NIAS is global. It's also US, but it's widely regarded. I've mentioned it many times during this. I'm going to test all of you. The US FDA food contact notification, again, or the threshold of regulation submissions. And then you've got your 21 CFR range. We do everything from the 175 coatings and adhesives all the way up to 178, and that includes 176, which is paper, 177s, which is all the polymers. And the EU, obviously the 1935 plastic framework regulation, we cover all of that testing, and it ties in with Mercosur in South America. China, our labs in China have been running these tests for years. We have all the standards there. Israeli standards, SI 5113 as well as something we're covering. The Canada Food and Drugs Act, or LONO, Japanese Food Sanitation Act, and we've been getting more inquiries for Korea and Taiwan. So all the countries are getting more and more independent in their own testing compliance regulation requirements. Some of the services that we offer instead of just migration is seam integrity and bubble emission. Shelf life and stability. This means, you've got your new innovative packaging. Now, how does it perform with the product that you already have? Does it last for 12 months? Does the pH level change? We can do all of that testing in our labs. We could do both accelerated and real time. What does that mean? Real time, it would be 12 months. If your product is a 12-month shelf life, we would test it for 12 months, and testing it at intervals we could do every month, every 3 months, for example. And an accelerated version would be an increased humidity and temperature to see what would happen, and instead of in the 12 months, but in a quicker timeline. So it would be 6 months instead of 12 months. We can also do polymer ID density and characterization. Again, this is fast becoming a frequently requested requirement from customers because of all the materials that are out there. We can also test for opacity and colorimetry. And here are the labs again, as I mentioned, in New Berlin, Wisconsin, and Tustin, with the relative emails you can reach out to. And I'll pass it back to Scott for any more information. And just to remind you that we will be sending out this document within the next 3 business days.
Great, thank you. Here, yeah, I will come back in. I've got a couple questions, just a handful. But of course, if any others come in, feel free to send them. So you covered my little basics there, yeah. We'll send out the slides, the presentation, 3 business days or so. We are recording this, so you will have that. So if additional questions do come up, Trish has information here that you reach out to or check Trish. Okay, so I'm just going to get into a couple of the questions. To start with, let's see here. What are the biggest testing challenges when working with recycled PET versus virgin PET?
Great question. So I'd say the main challenge with recycled versus virgin is obviously, I think I've covered it a little bit, is the variability and uncertainty in the input system. You know, like with virgin, you're making it, you know, the composition is well known, it's in-house, you know exactly what's going into it. When it comes to recycled, you know, not knowing its origin is the biggest challenge. Where did it come from? What was it used for in its former life? What do you need to extract from it to make sure it's a reusable material? That seems to be the biggest question that I get brought a lot in the last couple of years as recycled materials become more prominent.
You mentioned kind of in one of your slides, you're talking about, you know, the programs to, you know, reuse some of the same containers. Like, is there different considerations there, like as considering that like a recycled PET, or is it, do you kind of have the same concerns because you don't know what people might have done with it in the interim?
Oh, well, when it comes to those programs, I was mainly talking about glass containers or metal containers. So there are there's one, I forget the name of it, based in New York, and you know, they sell products to their customers in either a glass or a stainless container, and these can cover everything from like flour to rice to oil, olive oil, cooking oils, maybe some basic sauces, all those kind of things. And then once you finish, you take it back to the store. Milk is another one, and they refill the same bottle, which wouldn't be a recycled material. So as of now, I'm not familiar with a recycled material bottle or product being refilled. Yeah.
Okay, that wasn't someone else's question, that was mine.
Oh.
Okay. Next question then. How do you see the re-evaluation of the EU framework regulation, numbers here, 1935, 2004, impacting companies that use recycled materials?
Yeah, this is a really big subject. I've actually attended a couple of conferences this year with this subject. I mean, it's really about raising the bar for internal compliance. Your regulatory department really needs to pay attention to the constantly moving regulations out in the EU, just simply because they are the leading guidance in this category. They're doing all the work. They've got the staff. They've got the people to dedicate time to investigation and testing and everything that they need to stay compliant. And there are some very unrealistic goals that they've sent. I've heard some frustration, a lot of frustration from manufacturers and suppliers out there with unreasonable limits that they're expected to reach with some of these things such as phthalates and PFAS, phthalates in particular, or bisphenols as well. So I would say that keep an eye on it. That's the biggest challenge. Just keep an eye on the growth of that, along with the recycled plastics regulation, which is constantly being reworked. Every year now there's something new. Every couple of months, I feel like. So just stay up to date, sign up to all of the websites for newsletters, My inbox is flooded every day with new news, and it's all the same: PFAS, phthalates, BPA, BPS, BPF, BPAF. So yeah, hope that helps.
Well, cool. All right, that kind of leads into my next one. So you talked about like staying up to date and stuff like that. I mean, are you aware of anything coming? Any new restrictions or guidance or things that we can expect from the FDA regarding food contact materials?
Yeah, you know, it's the FDA. It's tricky. You know, they lost a couple of staff members in the new how do I say it? The new cycle of presidents. And you know, so they're a little understaffed right now. A lot of FCNs are being submitted, that I do know, because we're working on a lot more materials are being developed. PFAS continues to be at the forefront of things statewide. So again, as I mentioned earlier, keep an eye on each of the states. You know, we've got California, Maine, Vermont, Washington. Those states are really at the forefront of food contact with single-use, I would say single-use packaging requirements, as they all do their own investigations and bills, and they're putting forward for consumer safety.
I got one more, another one of mine I was kind of curious of. Obviously at the end you talked about additional services, shelf life testing and whatnot. I'm of course aware of what we all offer. You know, you talked about the regulations with food contact materials. Is there, you know, I might have missed this, but is there a shelf life aspect to that? Are there regulations that say you must test this over time to see if leaching happens, or you know, how does that kind of factor in? Is there overlap with that?
I think I understand the question. So migration testing in particular, yeah, it always depends. So I'll start with migration testing in general, which is usually which is guidelined by the EU framework regulation. And they have done the groundwork of establishing the products that you could be possibly using with your material. So on their website, they have a whole list of, you know, is your product dairy, or are you doing a juice? Is it a baked good? And based on your product, they will have a list of simulants. There's only a few simulants that you can use when it comes to migration. You don't actually migrate with your product, you migrate with the packaging and using a simulant to simulate your product. So you've got 10% ethanol, 20% ethanol, 50% ethanol, 3% acetic acid, 95% ethanol, isooctane, olive oil, and 10x for dry food. So these are the simulants that you can choose from. It's the list. And then based on your end product, there is a duration for the intended use. So the most standard would be 10 days at 40 degrees. And that is the duration it would be tested for, to see if anything migrates into the simulant in the conditions during that time. And that is how they have deemed to be the most accurate way of testing your product and use. I think that was, does that kind of answer the question?
Yeah, I mean, yes, exactly what I was wondering there. My question here, let me put it back up. Got a couple more coming in. One question was, can you expand on the requirements in Korea or share the KMFDS reference afterwards?
Yes, Korea, as I was mentioning, is a very new avenue for us. It's not wholly enforced. Not wholly enforced, how should I say it? It's still quite new to us. We've done it a couple of times, but most of the companies are relying still on Japan or China, if I'm honest, as they have higher restrictions and higher requirements. And so while you would do Korea, you would still also need Japan and China, whereas I feel like if you did China, it would cover a higher restriction. But please reach out to us directly for that, I can certainly send you some more information on the different countries and compliance we can cover. Indonesia as well is another one. Yeah, thank you for the question. And again, anyone else, if there's anything I've covered and you want more information on, please feel free to reach out. Either one of those emails shown on the screen will get to me. I monitor both inboxes. So yeah.
Here's another one here. If I understand the question, let me ask it this way: are there unique regulations within the United States by state, or is this all covered at the national level? Can you talk a little bit about the experiences there?
Yes. Yeah, that's why I just mentioned every state like California, Maine, Vermont, you name it, they all have their own regulations within the state, especially when it comes to single-use food contact materials. For example, only some of the states have requirements for PFAS, and that's only for PFOA and PFOS. Some states have, like Minnesota is the only state that's now testing for phthalates. So yes, every single state has their own internal requirements for certain categories. That's why you need to keep on top of the statewide as well as federal.
Is there is federal usually more stringent, or is there a certain state that kind of stands out? You kind of talked about people following the EU standards because, well, they're the strictest and you can have more versatility to it.
Yes. Yeah, I would say statewide, because the FDA can't keep up, the states are that's why the states are stepping up and doing their own. And I would say California is at the top because they have California Prop 65. If you don't know what California Prop 65 is, you can check the website. It's OEHA, OEHA. And they have a list of over 1,000 substances. Now, this doesn't restrict your product from being on the shelf, but if your material tests, above the daily allowance for, let's say, lead, then you are required to put a stamp on your product that states that the California Prop 65, you have acknowledged that you are above, and it's up to the consumer to buy the product. I will say I live in California and nobody recognizes it, nobody pays attention to those, which is terrible, except for me. But yes, there are still requirements. Amazon, if you're going to sell on Amazon, they require all that testing. So I'd say California, Vermont, Maine, Washington. Those to me are the top four. New York as well is fastly catching up with their restrictions and requirements. So I would say if you're intending on selling anything in the US, you should comply with all the states, because you don't know where your product's going to end up. So it can be pretty tricky, but I think most people recognize California Prop 65. We actually have a screening package because California Prop 65 isn't just like test me for that. You have to be specific to your material. If your material is paper, if your material is plastic, it can vary on what your product contains. Like, you're not really going to have certain plastics in paper. We're not going to have certain things that are in textiles. So it just depends on your product, number one, and what your clients are more focused on, whether it be phthalates or bisphenols. But we have a screening package that covers about 220 substances, ranging from some of the basic PFAS analytes to the chemicals, bisphenols. We've got alkaloids, we've got PAAs, we've got all kinds of a list. I can share the list with you if you reach out and want to know more about this package. And price-wise, it's such value for money, because if you test individually, let's say if you just tested for heavy metals and phthalates and then bisphenols, you're already at the $1,000 mark, whereas the screening test runs over 220, and I believe it's around $1,500. So it's great value. I always recommend that for packaging, because you're running your product through the gamut, so that if you have any client that asks you, has this been tested for bisphenol? Has this been tested for phthalates? You can go here. Here's a massive report with all the things that we've tested it for, and none of it's showing. Fingers crossed, hopefully.
Okay, so you kind of talked a lot about the different states and all that. I guess one last follow-up on that was, are you aware of any single source or tool or something to see some of these state regulations in one spot, or is it kind of piecemeal where you got to kind of hunt it down and figure it out, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's tricky. Like I would have put on here, but there's just so many resources. Honestly, I'd say just reach out to us. We can try and steer you in the right direction because it's constantly changing. I wish there was, you know, maybe EFSA, you know, EFSA would be a good starting point. And I know I'm missing one. Again, my brain's been on focus with this, but please reach out if you have that question again. I'll happily respond back to that person that asked the question. And if you're listening and didn't ask the question and would also like to know this information, please email again with, you know, requesting this information. I'll happily send you some of the resources. There's quite a few, and we'll go from there.
So basically, you are that single source that, you know.
Of course, I'm going to say come to me first.
Exactly. Well, okay, I think that's gotten through our list of questions. So I guess we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Trish, thank you so much. Great information. I hope everyone learned a lot. And again, we got some great resources, and you can come up with additional questions or thoughts after rewatching this, or, you know, processing today's information. Reach out. So
yeah. Thanks everyone for joining. I hope this has triggered, you know, some ideas of what you need to do, and please come and reach out to us for more information. I guess there's a lot of information here, and there's so much more detail that we can provide for you. Great. Thanks for your time today.
Take care, all.